Well, hello there, YouTube. I am Latanya Smith, the owner of My Place Cafe, and I have the pleasure this evening of introducing Daniel Ruiz, a fabulous poet here from Los Angeles. And I would love for you to sit back, get your favorite beverage, and just enjoy what you're about to hear. Daniel?
All right. Well, I'm thrilled, thank you, Latanya, to have Daniel Jose Ruiz reading here this evening. In mine and Latanya's opener for Scott and Creeley's Prose and Poetry Night right back in May, I had mentioned you would see a novelist soon enough, and here he is. During Evan Kendall's Poetry Night back on the 10th, I said, now that I have my master's in English, I also thank him and this man, because he was my first ever college writing professor. When I told him the news, Ruiz said to me, "That's so awesome. You should always be proud of such." So before Ruiz reads to us, I'm going to play a video of a poet you have already seen at My Place Cafe. I mentioned his name a moment ago. He introduces tonight's featured storyteller, and we thank him for this. So awesome. You should always be proud of such. Just 1 second. I just realized that the Windows Explorer thing is on and it's gonna echo everything we say.
Okay.
Yeah. My apologies.
No problem.
This is what happens when you have to do things digitally. It's all right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, hi there. You just found me reading The Coconut Verses by Daniel Jose Ruiz. It's one of my favorite books. I love it. It's a story of a coming of age of a young man who has to negotiate race, identity, friendship, and family. Ruiz is also the author of The Life of Giancervo, an epic sci-fi novel that might also have some important subtext about identity, power structures, race, and class. Ruiz is a natural-born storyteller. I know, because on top of being a fan of his work, I've known him since he was a child. Even back then, he put a story over everything. You weren't playing hide and go seek. You were harmless aliens on a hostile ship that were stowing away before some burly Marine could find you and eliminate you. You weren't just playing tag when you were playing with Danny. You were running from a mystical virus that turned you into a werewolf. He's always layered his imagination over everything. And then he's always made that imagination human. He's made it telling a story that matters on top of being fantastical. I'm not surprised that he's become one of what I consider to be a great millennial author. His work's accessible, it's empathic, it's exciting. He makes you care about characters, even the ones that you hate. I've rarely read someone who writes with as much empathy. I use his work in my classes, and when I've shared his work with my students, they appreciate that it's approachable, it's in common language, and there's always big ideas behind it. I know that actually I wouldn't be a writer without Danny's early influence. He cares about writing as a field. He always has. He wants to help with the work of others, and he wants it to excel as much as his does, which is why he's the vice chair of English at Los Angeles City College. Position that probably if you'd asked me about when I was 10 years old, I would have told you that he would have worked his way into. I know that Daniel's honing the next group of the writers who are going to make the future of the art form. And it makes me extremely proud and extremely glad for the future.
I apologize. I'm gonna make sure that this is shown because I just looked at it on my end on my phone, and you can only hear but not see. So my apologies again. Wait, what is going on here?
All right. It's still a lovely intro.
Yeah.
It was, right?
I'll just finish playing it. I'll just finish playing it the way it is, and we'll just move on.
Yeah.
My apologies on this.
You can get it
everyone.
in post. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that today is your lucky day, and that it's my great pleasure to introduce Daniel Jose Ruiz.
Oh, I'll have to make fun of Scott when I see him next time. But thank you. And thank you, Jesse, for, again, it's always, I think one of the greatest prides I have teaching is watching students grow, and to see Jesse to think back when I first met him and to think of him now, it just fills me with pride. And I mean it when I say, never, ever, ever think ill of your education, because it's one of the only things that you can be given that can never be taken away from you, to paraphrase someone else. And yeah, you earned it. And there's a lot of smarts there, but there's, more importantly, there's just a lot of work ethic. There's a lot of drive. There's a lot of, willingness to sit down and do it. And that's really what it matters most. So thank you, Jesse. And thank you, Latanya, for opening My Place Cafe to me, even if it's just digitally. I do look forward to being able to come and read and talk with you in person.
Yes.
Yeah, especially once things are a little safer for
That's
everyone
right.
involved, which is, big for me. So hi, thank you. I'll be reading 2 chapters from my, newest book, a sci-fi novel, The Life of Giancervo. The chapters are generally short, so I won't go on too long. And then luckily for me, a great lover of literature and a great part of the literature today, Peter from the Chills at Will podcast is here, and we'll talk a little bit after the fact. And again, if you have not checked out his podcast, Chills at Will, it is absolutely essential. I think he interviews writers of all varieties, whether they be genre writers, journalists, you got sports, there's a great episode about sports writing. There's great episodes about the war on drugs and the Mexican cartels. And it's you have poets, you have literary writers, you have, just all varieties. And it's, again, very much worth downloading. Makes your commute far more educational than it would be otherwise. So I'm very lucky for that. So I'll start reading. I'm going to read the first chapter. So shouldn't need too much introduction, and then take a quick break, and we'll get into I'll probably have to do a little bit of preface for the next chapter after that. But yeah, so this is just the opening chapter of The Life of Giancervo. We were alone for the moment, and for the first time in my life, I had nothing to say. I could think of about a dozen things to say to her, but each time I tried to bring a sound out of my throat, all that came was empty air. I was quite used to empty air. I often used it to shape words that were equally as empty, but taken at great value. It was my one gift. It separated me out from the others. I was a speaker, but in the tunnel, the slick plasticrete warmed by a coat of algae and filth, I was speechless. There were plenty of reasons to be, the biggest being survival. They would find us if we spoke. The tunnel carried every noise. All we could do was gently place our feet as we slowly walked, toes to heel. We were so conscious of our footsteps, the soft scratch sound as we displaced the green sludge. Even our heartbeats sounded coarse and heavy. She was having the harder time, holding onto my arm tightly as she stepped. She could not see in the dark. I was favored among my stock. The keepers appreciated my talent. When I was punished for daring to wield sarcasm, they replaced both my cauterized eyes with their own machines. They bore me enough affection to give me such things, but they never gave me a moment to think that I was not beyond their cruelty. I was owned, and they took away so many parts to remind me of this. But their torments were equally cruel gifts. I saw everything all the ways nature never intended. It helped in the tunnel. I wanted to read to her. I could in fact read 4 of the old tongues, and they were everywhere in the tunnel, faded beyond what any normal eye could detect. I wanted to tell her that there was hope for us, that signs had been posted for us to follow. It would have been a lie. The words were nonsensical, vernacular long since eradicated. Only the messages of war were left. Fight to the death. Never let them take you. We will not survive. But I wanted to tell her not to be afraid. I wanted to lie to her like I lied to so many others, but not because the keepers wanted me to quell uprisings or fears, to pit 2 mongrels against each other for sport, or to end a rumor. I wanted to lie to her so she would not be afraid while she was with me. I could not speak because she held my arm so tightly. I had only ever been gifted the touch of flesh 4 times in my life. I had forgotten the sensation of another of my kind holding me, sending their warmth into mine, feeling fluids and heat and heartbeats. I was not a breeder. I was not strong enough, too smart, too quick with my mind, and too quick with my feet. I was a speaker. Speakers do not get to breed. After I had convinced a mongrel to back down from tainting a keeper's vitae injections, I was given a consort. For 3 hours we were together. It was my first, certainly not hers. She held me close and let me smell every part of her. She nuzzled my neck, kissed my cheek, and whisper panted in my ear. As the timer went off, she gripped my arm so hard that it bruised. Consorts were almost always alone, companionship only granted when it was required. Most of them were barely able to speak, only make groans of pleasure or their cooing noises. She didn't want to be alone, trapped inside her overly soft and perfumed room. She held on so tightly, her eyes pleading without a language to do so. Even the words of begging were denied to her. The keepers wanted the consort starved for affection, shackled by loneliness. It made them good at what they do. But the grip of my companion reminded me of that moment, even through my shirt. I was glad that she had normal sapient eyes. In the darkness of the tunnel, she could not see my excitement. The keepers did not like speakers to be sexual creatures. We were punished harshly for it. I feared the prod, the liquid fire it would inject whenever our minds drifted to anything that engaged the part of us that made us want. But the prod was not here. Only she was. I did not want to speak because she was a ravager. The sound of any sapient voice had the potential to set her into a frenzy. They were the enforcers and soldiers, not meant to harm the keepers, only keep kindred in check. I'd already spoken to her, kept my voice high, perfect and lyrical. It kept the programming at bay. Only a speaker could manage such and live. My training was constant, all-encompassing. I never raised my voice above a whisper unless I attempted the true speech. I needed my throat whole. Every part of me had to be kept intact in order to hit the near inaudible whines and bass of the true speech. My voice was not sapient to her. She did not see me as the enemy. Everyone but the keepers was the enemy of ravagers. But my eyes let me see what my voice did to her. The change in heat, the rise in blood pressure, the dilating of her pupils as adrenaline flowed through her. She was not as large as the others. The keepers fed ravagers concoctions that made them layer muscle onto their frames, surgeries of puberty, anything to make them powerful. She was a runt. The treatments didn't take as well as required. No wonder they chose her for sport. She would still offer a good chase, a good fight. I could feel it in her grip, the sound of her metal hard nails scraping against the tunnel, and how quickly she moved when she encircled her prey. I knew she could kill me in a moment. She had taken a keeper. I did not speak because I never seen a keeper dead, their metallic bodies and glass eyes, all 10 of them frozen in death. Their blood was thick, smelled of rotten meat, their long withered flesh barely there. We were told that they were immortal, deathless, but she showed me they were not. I had the suspicion. I was closer to them than any others of my kind. They laughed as if I were a beast when I would sit at their dinner orbs. I did simple tricks like memorize their poetry and recite it as best my clumsy tongue could manage. They often started arguments just to see if I was gifted in my craft as they wanted. They valued my reasoning, my wit, and their education, but only in as far as it was endearing that something as lowly as me imitated its betters. I was a twisted mirror, a jester homunculus. I was their pet, kicked low and subservient. I was so happy to know that they could die. I wanted to tell the others of my kin. I wanted them to know we were not under the control of immortals. The gods did not rule us, only beasts like us. I was happy. I was so scared it hurt. All I could do was take her by the hand, pull her close to me, and nuzzle my head into hers. I knew that speaking to her would be my death, at least in the capacity I wanted to speak. But I also knew that the Ravagers were trained with contact. The Keepers said it was a flaw in our design, that physical gratification and violence were so interconnected. Besides breeders and consorts, Ravagers were the only types of us to be allowed to touch others. They would sleep in large piles, body to body, fornicating as they saw fit. The Keepers made sure they were as close to non-sentience as we could be. She wore only loose armor, the light mesh that was harder than steel and even absorbed the kinetic energies of weapons. Her hair was wild and dirty. Mine was soft and well maintained. Her skin was like mine, a rich brown of soft soil. Her eyes were the deepest red from the treatments. But we smelled the same, despite the perfumes and the blood. When I was so close to her, showing her through my body that I was not a threat, I could smell the same thing on each of us. It was recognition that we were not long for this place. I could not speak because she was dying. The Keeper did not yield quietly. Its cruel weapon had caught her in the side, tearing flesh and organ. Only a Ravager would take the wound and continue to attack. The Keeper must have forgotten this. Too much pride in its weapons and its innate superiority. Ravagers are trained to kill sapiens, to aim for the throat, the upper thigh, the tendons in the ankle, back of the knee, elbow. Keepers were different. They had no ankles or knees to attack, but they did have throats, of a sort. That was enough. She buried a hand into the soft gray flesh, then she buried the other. The flaw in the keeper's design was that they breathed through their neck, and even their metal skin could not be placed over it. Shock took the keeper, but it still had the strength to fight, yet it was scared, a foreign emotion. Its walking tentacles flailed and lashed out, its two mechanical arms and the biological set dropped their weapons out of shock. She kept clawing until she was covered in thick blood. She howled in victory. It was every probe, every shock vest, every damn thing they did to her to make her a killer. But the keeper earned a draw because she was dying. In the darkness, I could see blood starting to flow slower. Not because the wound was healing, only that there was less and less blood to lose. Her grip was weakening. Soon I would have to carry her. I do not know why I did. I was just as dead. A keeper was murdered, and we were to blame. The others would never accept that I had no part in it all. My only job was to sing and incite her anger, so the keeper would not have to work too hard on the hunt. I just had to make her stupid and feral. It worked, but she went for it, not me. Its guard was down, waiting to deliver a killing stroke with their ceremonial hunting blades as she charged me. It did not expect her to charge it. But no one would believe it. If the keepers could die, they had died before. They must keep it quiet. I am a speaker. I cannot keep quiet, except for then, in the tunnel with my dying Ravager, the sapien I loved. I could not speak because I had sung many poems of love, but never felt it. I felt it then. She made me lead her into the tunnel, long since abandoned and ignored. It was from the old days when my kind was the only owner of the land. The keepers owned the eastern lands, and the strangers owned the west. The west. Only speakers knew this. We were a damn fraternity in that sense. To the consorts, breeders, and mongrels, we were the last of our people. But speakers got to meet strangers. This is why we are allowed to learn the old tongues, to broker peace and trade with our own kind. I knew they had a settlement not too far, days at most. They even told me that there were places with no keepers, only strangers. I didn't believe them, not a single word. Who watches a red sun burn every day and accepts a stranger telling them that it is blue? I had no other choice but to believe it then. I was in love with the Ravager. She freed me, even if only to die in the tunnels as the keepers hunted us. But there were no keepers in the tunnel. There was no fear of the immortal gods of my life. There was only the tunnel and the Ravager. I wanted to sing to her and to recite the love poems brought to me by strangers, my most precious contraband. I wanted to touch her in the way of the consorts, not as a reward nor to breed, only because I wanted her to know what I felt inside. I wanted her to know I loved her through the way my body moved and the sounds my lips made against her skin. I wanted to thank her for my feelings without the sting of the probe, but I did not know how. I had sung of the love of keepers, eternal coupling that required nothing but the deepest bonding of the soul. I had sung of heroes and villains of people to which I did not belong. I had never sung or spoken for myself, and even if I did, she would murder me for it. I did not speak because the light was close. I could hear rain. The keepers did not appreciate our water. Our domain was protected by the shields, sheltering us all. But I knew we were past it when I heard the rain. I pulled her hard. She was stumbling. I picked her up as best I could. She was tall as I, more muscle and girth, but I carried her anyway. I quickened my pace. I did not care if the keepers heard me. All I wanted was to feel water from the sky fall onto my body. I wanted her to die in the rain. I wanted her last breath to be full of water, not treated with the keepers' drugs or lies. I saw what they fed Ravagers, sterilized raw meat, mostly from dead mongrels and breeders. Their water was laced with sedatives, made them sleep, trained them to sleep after gorging on a kill. This ensured that when they were released against mongrels, the most common and rowdy of us, the Ravagers would simply lay down to sleep after the bloodlust ended. I wanted her to sleep because her body demanded it, not because it was trained or drugged. I wanted her to die in a place that keepers did not own. I wanted her to die where she could know through the smell of it, the feel of it, that she was no longer owned, that we were not born to be only this, what they made us to be. I did not speak when we emerged from the tunnel. I cried. The rain was icy cold. It stung my skin each time it fell, but it was enough. The Ravager did not cry out. Her breathing was shallow, her skin an unnatural pale. I put her on her back in the thin mud, and my voice returned. I sang a song with no words. I simply created notes and tones. Her eyes flashed in their rage, but her body was too spent to act upon it. She seemed to accept it as I took her hand. She squeezed, not in anger. She squeezed and she spoke to me in the only way she had, and it was the most beautiful language that could ever exist. She smiled. I sang until her breathing stopped. The heat left her body. The small light in her form finally dissipated. I kissed her hands, still coated in the blood of the keeper. I kissed her cheek and told her I loved her. I sang one last song, the only stranger song I really understood. It was about pain. It was about loneliness. It was about death. And it was the only thing of us I could give to her. I gave her a name in my head, the barest of tombstones that I could manage. I ran as fast as I could to what I hoped was west. I did not care I was tired. I did not care I was alone. I only cared that I could run. I was not allowed to run in the domain. The constant intake of air could damage my voice. I did not care anymore. I ran in the rain for the first time in my life, and it was like being born. I was actually sapient then, not just a speaker. I often ask the strangers whom I meet if they ever remember the first time that they did such. They respond no. I pity them greatly for it. But I pity those in the domain who could never follow me more. I pity those I left because they never heard an honest song, never felt honest rain, and never knew that we are not owned, only enslaved. So that's chapter 1. So thank you, Jesse. And so I'm going to skip through a few parts because the next 5 chapters are about Gian kind of surviving the wilderness between where he was enslaved and the kind of human city. And so I'm just going to skip to where he wakes up at the kind of hospital in the human city. So I'm just going to kind of jump ahead 5 chapters and do this quick because I feel like this also gets to some of the other ideas that the book is playing with. So chapter 6. I do not remember the skiff. I do not remember the first touch of stranger arms lifting me from the dust. How strange I must have appeared to them. There I was, a foreign entity in the midst of a barren land, dead in body but burning with joy in the mind. I wonder if they looked at my eyes and marveled at such technology. I wonder if I spoke to them. I wonder if I sang. I have not sung since my first reign. I have not used my true voice at all, my talent. Even once I awoke from my death, I was silent. The room was called a hospital, and for a moment I felt my heart sink as the lifeless white walls and floor reminded me of the keepers. It was not until I saw the nurse, my caregiver, that I relaxed. She touched me so freely, so casually, that I nearly slapped her hand away. It felt like such a betrayal to my ravager. She looked at me with such pity, unrestrained and unashamed of how little she thought of me. I could see some odd machine on my stomach, the artificial warmth in my blood. My eyes were working at full capacity again, and I could register the different heat signatures of the building. I was in a room in a small place, the blazing blue energy fields of several generators humming. There was something interfering with them, a screen of some kind, but my eyes were able to adapt. The nurse looked at my eyes, clearly fascinated by them, and she asked me many questions. I did not answer. She spoke in Latinic. I motioned for something in which I could transcribe. She handed me a small, thin pad that was full of vibrant colors and aesthetically sleek. I stared at it for a moment, unable to understand how to make it record my words. The woman smiled, understanding my plight, and she carefully showed me how to operate the device. I would later learn that infants were quite fluent in these machines, their first toys, and this often saddened me. I have watched children immerse themselves in these machines, moving blocks and shapes into positions, their brains quickly codifying the exterior world, and I mourned that they knew so little of what it meant to hold a piece of metal or wood, to know that it is precious. The datasheets were useful, no doubt, and my life after bondage has been defined by them in many ways. But then in my age, I've come to appreciate more the feeling of crudely crafted toys and flutes that I fashion out of whatever material I have at hand. I had never been able to make something with my own hands until I was free, and now I live amongst people who are free and have no desire to do such. She read my story, or rather she had the words read to her by the datasheet. I would come to learn that almost all strangers were uncomfortable reading. The datasheets and data screens would read material for you at a rapid speed, the words slurring together, but phonetically distinct enough for the sapient mind to process. Strangers spoke in the same way, rapid and blurred, but no sapient could speak as quickly as the datasheet's algorithm could. The eyes and the ears are only antenna, as it is the brain that truly sees or hears. By giving the brain exactly what it needs to see or hear, the useless noise is removed. The strangers lived in a world defined by the editing of the world around them, and it was in this moment I began to suspect why the strangers had abandoned me and all kindred. It also explained their fetishization of my eyes, as they saw it as a rare gift to have such an upgraded and efficient set of information receptors. The woman cried at my words, making sweet noises that were designed to comfort. She put her hand on my head and spoke to me like a wounded animal. Perhaps to her I was simply that. She expressed her surprise that I was able to write so well, and when she learned of my function amongst the keepers, she was again adamant that I speak. She wanted to hear me sing. She told me that everyone thought that the keepers had the most beautiful language. I refused to write to her for several days after this. Nothing of the keepers was beautiful. No language, no art, no architecture could be beautiful that was built through the destruction of innocent life. She did not understand my resentment, and for the next few days, I simply recovered alone. The machine in my stomach kept me alive, kept me from feeling hunger. The woman was kind enough to leave a data pad for me, and while I no longer had her instructions, with hours of free time, it became simply a process of trial and error to discover its functions. There were many, many games. Most were simple time management activities that relied upon the reasoned application of attention to different digital representations of life. They became increasingly difficult as less time was granted to more requirements, and so the game inevitably hit a point where the user must learn to make decisions faster and with more reflex than consideration. Some games were logical puzzles designed around moving shapes into specific patterns or creating patterns through seemingly random variables. But again, the games reached the same logical progression where not enough of the specific variables were assigned, making it more a matter of luck and their distribution than skill. Almost all these games required currency in some form or at some point. While the initial phase would require nothing, once it became clear that the player could not win given the restrictions of the game, it would allow the player to use currency to access temporary or finite modifications to the game, allowing the user to win. I had no currency of my own, and some games would not even start as I consistently received the error message that no IWNS was present. I did not know what this was, and it was not until my caretaker returned that I was informed it was an internal wealth navigation system, a subdermal machine that was linked to all of an individual's wealth and credit, allowing for instantaneous transactions and monitoring of capital. She offered to unlock a few more games for me, but I politely declined. I wanted to ruminate more on the nature of wealth before deciding to engage in such practices. I was not ignorant of the concept of currency, as, after all, my existence was designed to facilitate trade between keepers and strangers. For the keepers, all physical material was a form of wealth, whether it be soil, water, life, or even death. They also had extensive systems for regulating the immaterial world and how it related to wealth, whether it be complex concepts such as ownership of ideas, thoughts, and formulas. The keepers believed in wealth. It was as close to a deity as they had. I was a measure of their wealth, as speakers were resource intensive to keep. We required diligent, often personal attention, as well as the fact that we truly produced nothing. Mongrels produced ore. Consorts produced pleasure. Ravagers produced death. Speakers simply allowed the production of trade with others. The keepers always valued what truly produced nothing. My caste was that of luxury, as I had often heard keepers disparaging others of their kind that could not afford such. I was a commodity, and when I became free, I found that I was without worth. I had no commodities of my own, not even a data sheet. My only true commodity was my eyes, and despite having many offers to sell them, I never thought to lose them. Yes, they were a gift from the keepers, but my eyes have always reminded me to see the world separately from others. To be fair, part of my sometimes irrational attachment to my eyes was that it was a constant insult to the keepers. They rarely ever allowed the inferior species access to their technology. Yet there I was with not only one of their more advanced examples of dominance, but it was truly customized to me. I remember the 8 different surgeries that were required to fully install my eyes. I was awake for each. They wanted me to know the pain of my insults, but they also wanted me to be grateful for just how much work they invested into me. They constantly sang that each burning tool, each drill into my face, each disconnection of a nerve was a beneficent and magnanimous act. The fact that I was free, their investment destroyed, absolutely filled me with joy. It still does. The fact remained that I was without any means in a place where means were required for existence. The hospital that sheltered me did so out of charity, but even this was an exchange of goods, the more than I really knew. The local magistrate, the primary shareholder in the city, Caro, to which I found myself, had placed a tax benefit to any organization that aided RefXs, refugees of Xenos-related catastrophe. This tax benefit allowed him to claim charitable actions upon his own taxation from his parent company. In essence, every moment that I stayed at the hospital up to the prescribed limit of exemption, I generated more wealth for the hospital and the magistrate. The tax code gave me 3 standard weeks, which equated to roughly 5 cycles of the day here. Once I was no longer a source of profit, but of cost, the hospital would remove me. Having no desire to be completely destitute, I began much research into occupations and other means of generating income. There were many mechanized assessment protocols that I could undergo, but each required a payment that I did not have. It was impossible to find any employment that offered any wages, any at all, without the completion of these protocols to measure my ability. The hospital staff made it clear that there was no tax exemption for my situation, as personal charities of individuals did not cover paying examination fees, housing, food, medical care, or general donations of capitals to others. Some of the surgeons did promise to donate to a charity that provided services to unfortunates like me, but then this organization had no impetus to help me specifically, as they had a long list of applicants. With how much of the medical care was automated, it was not like their occupations produced great wealth for themselves either. It is easy to say in hindsight that my ordeal was in no way greater than what I'd faced in the wasteland. But then I had no experience operating in a world where my personal agency was tempered not by pain, but by wealth. In such strange twists of the world, the education that the keepers forced upon me proved again to be a weapon in my war of freedom. After years of training, I could process through data faster than other strangers. And while the exceedingly affluent could afford the information injection machines that were my education, they did not dedicate hours to it a day as I was forced. The pain was unavoidable, but I found that my life as a speaker meant that my threshold for pain was well beyond the average stranger. I can really only guess at just how hardened and willful mongrels or ravengers must be. I lived a life of great comfort, relatively, and yet my ability to ignore pain seemed to fascinate the strangers. I've seen mongrels carry pieces of machinery twice their size and 4 times their weight, all with broken bones. When this realization first hit me, I can distinctly remember the sheer amount of awe and respect that I afforded them. They were titans, creatures of such focused will and spirit that it harrows the very mind to think of the depth of their strength. To this day, I still marvel at them. Having to sift through thousands of pages of legal documents seemed quite inconsequential next to their plight. Looking through various laws and legal regulations of my newfound city, I determined that one of the few legal means of acquiring capital and required no assessment protocols was salvage operations. Those that initially found me were in fact employed in such activities, and these scrappers would become my first associates and employers. Once I learned that it required no protocols, I began to learn about the profession. I would need a vehicle capable of covering the distance and retrieving any lost or damaged materials, and this was an investment far beyond me. Thankfully, the crew of the Douglas, the skiff that found me, was quite interested in where I'd found my birthday presents. According to the law, as I had returned from the wasteland in possession of these items, they were mine by right of salvage. The knife, belt, blanket, and boots were mostly valueless, but the campfire itself was actually quite valuable. I could see why. I learned that the pistol also would have been equally valuable. The captain, Sojourner, visited me twice during my hospice. Her questions were plain, and I appreciated this. She made little attempt to hide that she was interested in the rather lucrative salvage that had been my salvation, and while it would be easy for me to fall into pessimism about this, namely that she may well thought I was incapable of understanding the concept of currency, I did not assume malice. This seemed ungrateful to the woman who rescued me from the barren lands that had been my crucible to freedom. So, the end of chapter 6. Thank you. So yeah, the from there, the main character Gian, he actually gets his name from the hospital, since he has a name from the speakers he never uses, he never tells anyone what it is, and Giancervo is essentially in that world's their John Doe, right? So his, for our understanding, would be John Doe. It's just a general name given to anyone, he becomes a scrapper eventually. Thanks to the technologies he has access to, gets a really huge, sweet score for his crew, becomes very wealthy, and ends up becoming a lawyer. And then from that kind of gets drawn into the abolitionist movement to actually actively help other kindred escape from the keepers, as well as try to press the other, what you would call sapien governments, because there's quite a few of them, to either embargo or even outright go to war with the keepers for the other kindred. So the rest of the novel kind of follows his experience trying to become and be a successful abolitionist. So yeah, so that's the life of Giancervo, available. You can get it from the big guys like Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You can order it directly from the publisher, Pegasus. Preferably, the best thing, if you are asking me, not that you are, but if you were asking me, I would say the best thing to do would be hit up your local indie bookshop and say, hey, there's this book, The Life of Giancervo by Daniel Jose Ruiz. I really want to buy it. Can I buy it from you guys? Can you order it for me? Maybe get them to order a couple more copies, tell your friends, but yeah, support your local indie bookstore as much as you can. So especially as an indie writer from a relatively smaller press, it helps. So thank you. So Peter, what do you think? What's up?
Man, so again, you said Pegasus.
Pegasus Publishing, yeah.
Right. And I know you're a big fan of indies. You ended your acknowledgments or the preface with a shout out to your indie bookstores.
Oh yeah,
we're on board. We agree. You wouldn't say no to an Amazon buy, but
of course not. And I understand that for some people that's what they have, right? There, you might be in an area where there really isn't an indie bookstore. You might not be able to go travel to one. As someone who has to use Amazon because I have kids, and it's just the reality, you save a lot of money with Amazon sometimes on certain products. I totally get it, but I do see, especially with books, if there is an indie bookstore in your area, you should get to know them. You should patronize them because I saw a great thing earlier of try to buy books from people who want to sell books, not go to the moon.
Love it. Any shout outs to maybe a hyper local, one of your favorite indie?
Oh, there's luckily LA's come up. There's a lot more than there actually used to be. There's my favorite, who's kind of been one I've loved since I was in high school is Skylight Books in Los Feliz.
Mhm.
I've been going there for a very long time. I think I had my first reading as a fully published author there at Skylight. I'd love to, hopefully when things calm down a bit, I'm going to try and do, a reading there because I love them. It's very close to my school, my campus. So I try to send my students there. There's a Last Bookstore downtown. There's, what is it, Tia Chucha's and up in the North Valley. So there's a fair few, and there's Romans in Pasadena, which is again been there for 100 plus years, I think. They're a great place. They're a very large bookstore, so they carry all the books you would expect, but they also they do their best to kind of support indie authors and local writers as well. So those are kind of great places to go. And there's a whole list. There's actually a lot more, although I remember one of my, I think it was when I was at getting my master's in English at UC, no, it was actually my MFA at CalArts. One of my instructors, a guy named Tom Lutz, commented that when he was in Paris at a reading, that the person remarked that there were within the city limits of Paris, there were over 300 bookstores, but within the city limits of Los Angeles, there's something only like 20. And Los Angeles is a considerably larger city than Paris in terms of square footage. So it's one of those things of we could always use more. Could always use more.
Yes. How long has the book been out, and what did it feel like to see your name like on a cover?
Oh yeah, that was cool.
Like a beautiful cover, by the way.
Oh yes, I have to. That's all the fine people at Pegasus. They were a great publisher to work with. I told them what I wanted essentially and gave them some ideas. They had an in-house artist who designed it. They gave me actually the option of, do you want your name traditionally here or like the one they put it on the book? And I was like, oh no, the one on the book. Like, yeah, put me on the book. Like my name doesn't need to be that big. It's all over the place in the book,
Yes.
But it's been out since actually just shy of my birthday. I think it published April 26th. Was its official street date. So it's been out now for just a couple months. So still young in the life of the book, especially during the great pandemic when time doesn't mean anything. And a lot of great books kind of, unfortunately, it's hard when your book comes out when it's hard to schedule events. It's hard to be certain that if you do schedule an event 2 or 3 months in the future, that you will even be able to do the event.
Right.
Right. So it's just out. So it's still pretty fresh baked. And yeah, I love it. I love the cover, and like I said, I'm very appreciative of Pegasus Publishers because they really did in the early stages did a lot of work with me on the cover design, with the editing, with the just kind of overall design of the book. So, and I was very pleased with that.
Well, they're not just going to go after any old writer. You did a heck of a job, and it was really cool to hear those 2 chapters to give obviously the beginning and pushing the narrative down a bit down the line in chapter 6. I want to maybe start with, there's at least one question from YouTube.
Oh yeah, sure.
So the question is, thank you to Adam Solis. Adam says, when creating characters, how much of yourself, friends, or family do you instill in them, both in their personalities and their appearance?
It's really varied. I think in this work, because it's sci-fi, I wasn't really like who I was really mining for Gian was actually, and I'm very honest about it, especially the last lines of the book are almost verbatim copied from him, is Frederick Douglass. And that's who I really had in mind when I was thinking of Gian with, and then started mixing in others. But I think it's there's like 2 answers to that question. The kind of coy answer is like, oh, of course not, it's all rich tapestry. But I think in the reality is writers look at who they know and they look at the people they've interacted with, and I think good writers try to be empathetic and understand the people around them, and then mix and match. I wouldn't say I've ever taken someone I know or dislike and copy and pasted them, but I do look at people. No, never. I mean, it would be fun. I mean, I'd probably make it way too blatantly obvious if I did. But it's a lot of the times it's, trying to identify specific things about people, whether it's their speech patterns, like do they, what are those words they use when they're clearly searching for something to say? Like, are they ummers? Are they, knows? Are they likes? Do they talk with their hands? things like that, and paying attention to those little things, I think helps build characters more organically, because you have a real life model of this is a real person, and you can give them those humanizing traits that people can attach to, because we all tend to do somewhat similar things. So I think everyone here probably knows someone who talks with their hands too much, someone who modulates their voice maybe too much, besides other maybe their personality traits of how like I always think of the guy who know someone, and I'm not gonna name them, but who was always super keen on everything. Everything was always the best thing ever. It was like, it's like, hey,
Which is
did you
not
try that new?
possible.
Yeah, right. But it was always like, hey, did you try that new pizza place? Man, it was the best pizza I've ever had, bro. It is so good. And you go there, I'm like, dude, this is fine, I guess. But right, everything was always the best. And so, but things like that, I think help make, real grounded characters, if you're empathetic to it and don't make them just caricatures, right?
Sure.
Yeah, or just doing.
Yeah, I appreciate Giancervo as Frederick Douglass, right? I could see Frederick Douglass saying, "To be sapient is to be defined by the ideals that bind us together."
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. Like when I was, yeah. Again, the last, I'm very, like I said, I try to be, I never tried to be too coy in my writing with my influences or who I'm looking at. So like, the name of the ship that rescues him is the Douglas. The name of the captain is Sojourner, right? So Sojourner Truth, right? There's a lot of obviously references to the it's an abolitionist novel. So there's a lot of references to the great abolitionists, during the antebellum period and post of the Civil War. But like the very last paragraph, I even say it here of, where is it? It's in the last page. Where is it? Oh, yeah. So second last page, as I read once, a document so long lost to time, yet so tragically relevant, I must paraphrase it to my own ends here. So this is the very end of the book. And this is from Frederick Douglass's autobiography, right? It's just me kind of, paraphrasing, playing with it. At the end, in the growing twilight of my years, I understand now that my purpose has not been to suffer, nor has it been to produce wealth for myself or others. My purpose in life, inasmuch as life has any intrinsic purpose, is to be free and to assist others in obtaining this freedom. With all sincerity and an earnest heart, I hope that this artifact, a contemporary relic transcribed in a form so maligned yet so vital to the condition of sapiens, sheds light on the atrocity that is the system of enslavement, control, and conditioning that so remains prevalent in our existence. And my greatest hope is that it hastens the glad day of deliverance to the untold millions of my brethren and sisterin in physical, social, and intellectual bonds. And I shall remain relying upon the power of truth, love, and justice for success in my humble efforts, and solemnly pledging myself anew to the sacred cause. Right. And so that's the out of, heavily paraphrased, which I try to make clear. I'm like, I'm not that good of a writer. I'm stealing from a much smarter person than me. I try to make that clear in the actual text that, I was paraphrasing somebody, and that's Frederick Douglass. And which again, his, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, told myself, is one of my favorite books. It is just so beautifully intricate and powerful that, I think I read it 5 or 6 times before I started writing this novel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I would definitely like to come back to that area. One more question, or kind of a comment, but thank you, Brian Nelson. He says, I was curious as to some of the terminology choices, such as stranger, in seemingly a different sense of the word.
Yeah. I was playing with that. So there's a lot of like, kind of made up slang, and it's the kind of caste system. So with that, I really built it off the hacienda caste system. Right. That was, part of the kind of Spanish conquest of the New World, where if you didn't know, there were about 32 different designations you could be in the caste system. You could be, obviously being a Spaniard was number one. You were 100% Spanish in origin. You could be Creole, which means your parents were Spanish, but you were born here, and or you were born in the New World, right? You could be a Coyote, which is this mix. You could be Indio, right? And it's all about just the different racial makeup of who you are. And that caste determined what you could be, your social standing. There was definitely some kind of quasi race science of the time talking about, oh, well, this combination makes the best this, you want these kind of people to be your workers, you want these kind of people to be your maids, right? Or whatever it is, And so I took that idea and kind of had it where the keepers broke people up like that of, they wouldn't call, humans, anything, they would be like, okay, these are the mongrels, these are the, here's the consorts, here's the speaker. And then even for Gian, that the idea of the strangers, of these are people that they don't know, right? These are people who live a totally different existence from them, because those who have been enslaved, they call themselves kindred, right? Family, right? Like to belong to each other. But to the other humans who have never experienced that and who live in this kind of very different reality, and granted, the book explores that reality is not easy, right? These people are, the strangers don't have any, most of them don't have good lives, right? Like they are struggling under their own forms of control and power and slavery, but that they are strangers to the existence of this whole other group of people that they don't even always see as equally people to them, right? And so it's kind of playing with that idea of why I have kindred call other sapiens strangers.
Sure. Very interesting. Your first book was Coconut Verses, which was, you talk about write what you know. You talked about a lot of, similarities to your real life. It's not nonfiction. It's
No.
fiction, but a lot of similarities.
Yeah,
And
I
then
wrote
you
about
go
places
to-
I've lived and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. And then you go to this book, which is, you have created a heck of a world. You've created a world. And I know it's based on, history. It's based on all these things, but was that tough to go from write what you know to write what you know because you've read about it, but
Right.
like this is a clearly fictional world?
It was really fun. I love world
Yeah.
building. I have since I was, a child, and much love to Scott for mentioning. We would always be playing games, right? It was never always just tag or things like that. We, and again, he acts like it's just me. It was both of us. We were always building worlds. I mean, this is why I think, being the geek that I am, I got into things like Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering, Warhammer, and all these, is because I love building worlds and I love reading worlds and seeing it in a different way. And so building this, there were times where it was definitely tough, where I'm like, okay, because part of it is just thinking of how to be honest to the world and build a functioning world of like, wait, how do people actually exist here, right? What would allow this, and one example I gave is like, or I'm thinking of is like, everyone speaks very fast because they're used to not reading, they're used to being read to, right? And so everyone speaks very fast. So I thought of like, okay, what would a stutter sound like then? If like your entire culture, your entire world, everyone speaks at this rapid speed you've been trained to speak at birth, because everything you read speaks at you at this incredibly blistering speed. What would it look like to stutter? And I tried to, I really had to think about it. I did some research on stuttering and what that means. So there's a character in there when he actually does have a line of dialogue, it's really kind of broken up, and it's very like, stretching out sounds more than just like stopping, because they've been trained to speak quickly, but their brain isn't really good at doing that, right? So what would that look like?
Sure. So I got to imagine it's pretty freeing to be able to just, in some way there are no rules, but also in some ways there are there are rules, right? Obviously science fiction is a proud tradition, and you don't want to step on the toes of any of the greats, and use terms they've used and all that. So I get, but I guess you could position that as reverence as well. Like, what kind of reverence do you have for like science fiction? And let's talk Octavia Butler. Let's do it.
Yeah. Oh, I have a lot. I mean, some of the first books I remember reading that I loved were science fiction, right? Like, and I was a late reader. And a lot of it was because people never let me read what I wanted to, right? Like I didn't want to read, what is it? The Red Fern or whatever, or Bridge to the Like I didn't want to read those. I wanted to read like the bad sci-fi choose your own adventure books that I'd found in the library, right? I wanted to read, even though I understood maybe like 10% of it, I wanted to read like Heinlein. I wanted to read Asimov. I wanted to read Tolkien. I wanted to read just stories that were interesting to me. Once I kind of really figured out how to read well and how to read kind of autonomously, where to like how to look up words I don't know, how to go back, how to kind of reread a sentence if I'm confused, and things like that, and actually teach myself better literacy, as well as having parents who are very literate and very good at helping me, and basically being given the freedom to read whatever the hell I wanted, right? Like I just started reading constantly, and that was a thing I'm very appreciative of my mother, particularly. She never really said no to books. If I checked out a book from the library, if I bought a book, if I asked her for a book, it was, I can't really remember any time she was like, no, this is too much for you, right? It was just, yeah, sure, you're reading, awesome, right? And it was great. And so, yeah, Octavia Butler, I try not to be too like I have a couple of like fledgling references in there in the book, just to, for my love of Octavia Butler. But it's just and part of it, I mean, I think the biggest influence is I try to write like her in the sense of to write in a way that the vast majority of people can pick up and understand what the hell I'm saying and understand the something to the ideas I'm trying to get to, but to never ever think people reading are dumb, and to never shy away from big conversations. Right. To to always assume that just because I'm saying something in sometimes a relatively simple way, that doesn't mean those ideas are simple, right? Or those ideas are not valuable, because I think Octavia Butler was always the master of doing that. For me, I think of a Parable of the Sower, where there's just kind of this, it's not really questioned, it's not interrogated, there's not this big heady paragraph upon paragraph about race and identity and blah blah blah. It's just they're going into Salinas, California, which is basically an armed camp, and they're like, oh yeah, the white boy goes first, and everyone who's dark skinned goes in the back, and that's the order we walk into to be able to get through security and go in. And it's just perfect. There's no long conversation, but it absolutely brings up every conversation you want to have about that, of like why, again, for survival purposes, they need to put the white man in front if they want to be able to get in.
There's a lot of people will talk about like someone like Octavia Butler, like she was ahead of her time, or she was a prophet, or I always thought that a prophet was like a 8-ball person telling the future, but a prophet is more, right, like someone who's telling it how it is, and maybe people don't see it or don't want to see it. So I guess I'm wondering how much you kind of commented on 2021 or 2019 in your book.
Oh yeah, I mean, really, I was commenting probably about 2000. I want to say 2018. I think that's when I finished the first real draft of it. I mean, because there's, I'm looking at a lot of what I'm looking at is just really the problems, and you read the book, you see that like, well, the problems are real, right? Like, especially when it comes to the life outside of the keepers and like, these, alien tentacle monsters. But like, how do you get the section I read? How do you, when school is automated, how do you get a job? You have to go through a testing protocol. You have to pay money for that. What happens if you don't have money? You can't take the testing protocol. Then how do I get a job? Right? Like, and it becomes that thing of like, well, you need an education to go to school to get a good job, right? Like, you just, at this point, there's very, very few jobs where without a college or even a, master or higher level education, you're not going to make a good living wage. But what if you don't have money because school's expensive? Right. And it's the same kind of basic idea of, that really is trying to kind of highlight the, I think, kind of the lunacy of that, of like, hey, tell everyone you need to get a job. Cool. How do I get a job? You need to go get this education first. Cool. How do I pay for it? I don't know. Get a job.
Right.
Right. Like, it's just like, oh, wait, what?
Cyclical. Yes.
Yeah. And, there's others of like the the wealth management system. I mean, I was making fun of free to play games, because I do like games on my phone, but how much everyone does iPads. Like the integral wealth management system where everything's inside of you. And like, I think about it with, credit cards, and now with Apple Pay, how much literally your existence is just a measure of wealth. Or even the way we talk about someone who's now having to start to get better at social media, of everyone's always talking about your brand. What's your brand? How do you do your brand? And I'm like, I'm a fucking human. I'm not a brand. I don't like, and we're literally, I see books about like teaching children what is their brand. And I'm like, why are we teaching them that they're products? Right.
No.
Like, and yeah, and this is like a big time seminar. This is someone who's like, that's their job, is to like help young people, empower them by helping them take control of their brand. I'm like, how about just let them be children and let them be young people? And let them be people, instead of having to be, what is a brand? It is a commodity, right?
Let them read what they want, like you're talking about. Let them find their own. Let them, do some self-teaching, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's so a lot of the book, I mean, a lot of the problems in the kind of the world that Gian navigates, that's not about fighting the keepers, is really, I try to be very, I'm trying to really, I was thinking about what would, assuming humanity gets off Earth, right? Because the story is set several thousand years in the future, right? So humans have left Earth. What would that actually look like, assuming we somehow manage to get off this planet, right? Like, Elon Musk and everyone else figure out how do they do this? And it is that, it's mostly large corporations. that control everything, that humans have this unfortunate natural tendency that's even more reinforced with things like the internet to give ourselves these kind of very tribal identities, and then branch off. So you would have just, in the infinite expanse of space, especially if you could terraform planets, you would just have, well, this planet's basically this very unique culture that doesn't ever talk to anybody. This planet is controlled by this corporation, so they're all the same. This planet over here is a bunch of people who are just farmers and want to forget that humans ever existed. This planet here, they've annihilated their own history, so they all think this is the only planet they've ever lived on, and there's no such thing as aliens, right? That everyone's just, if you have enough money, you can just go somewhere else and disappear and live in your own reality for the rest of your life, because you can do that now. And just imagine when literally it's not like, well, I can just read whatever news I want, or I could listen to whatever music I want. It's just, I could literally live on a planet where, unless someone knew exactly where to find me, I would never have to interact with another human again who disagrees with me.
I was just unfortunately watching a little bit of Space Jam 2, and algorithms.
Yeah.
Algorithms. I think the villain is actually named Algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw. I didn't get to see. I didn't see the movie. My wife took my son, but I read that of like, oh, Don Cheadle's an evil algorithm. Cool. I like that. And algorithms are a big part of my book. The thing of like most like economies are run by algorithms, right? Like most investment portfolio. I mean, banks are run by algorithms. Pretty much everything is run by a computer code, right? Because that's, I think, how it's going. I was thinking one of my friends was trying to get me to into crypto, of that there's this AI powered crypto company. You give them your money and they use an AI to work the crypto market, and it has returns that are triple that of a conventional investment system, because the AI is just, it's a machine. It's going to think faster and better than a human can in very specified ways. And so I'm just thinking in the future, 2000 years, assuming no major social event changes how we interact as humans together, we just continue being what we are and kind of naturally grow in that yeah, you're going to have most national companies are basically just going to be run by algorithms. There'll be an algorithm for everything. And then there's just people who are born into wealth and never have to do anything.
Right.
Because like the algorithm does everything for them,
Well, I might get sued by Space Jam or or whatever company made that, Warner Brothers. Yeah. You might get sued by like Tetris or iPad, or Apple, for that thing, or what a takedown of the insurance system.
Oh yeah, no,
it should be read. I mean, wow.
Yeah, I mean, good. I mean, this is maybe why I'm an indie publisher, because I couldn't imagine Random House being like, oh yeah, sure, let's just put that up.
Yeah, that was really well done. That was a major takedown. There's obviously so much allegory and symbolism in this book. I mean, there's so much of it. Was it like plot first, allegory kind of secondary, or the reverse, or were they always kind of side by side?
I'm almost always plot first. Like I try to think of the story. And I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman has a great quote of your first draft is just about telling your story. Your second draft is making it look like you knew what you were doing. And so, a lot of times, I with this, I wrote the first draft, and I liked it. I liked the plot. I liked the story, where it was going. And then as I was kind of reading and editing, I was like, well, this is a good place to, like with chapter 1 of like, this is a good place to put in Plato's allegory of the cave. Let me amp that up a bit. Let me reference the tunnel more, right? Let me, instead of light, let me do rain, right? Let me do water instead of light, because I like water as the source of, the idea of water as truth or as something like that a little bit more than light. But yeah, a lot of times it was going back and reading and being like, oh, I think I'm really talking about this. Let me punch that up. Let me make sure that's clear, because maybe in my weird mind, I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's totally obvious. I totally meant that. And then, someone reads it and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about here. Right. So I'm definitely a plot first type of person, where I want the story to be good, right? I want the story to make sense. And then, go back and put in the allegories, put in the symbolisms, put in the layers of the callbacks, right? Like of mentioning one thing on page 3 and making sure it's there on page 300 and, all that kind of stuff. And that's usually what I do in my edits. It's just going back and making those connections and kind of making it a more complete work, rather than, I rarely change the story itself very radically. I mean, it does happen, but it's very rare.
Right. This is a world where people don't want to teach history because it makes people feel bad about about history. It's a world where, you know, there are a lot of people, whatever that number is, who believe in, you know, there's a cabal of, you know,
Lizard
you know,
people.
right? It's a crazy world. You've been around these last, you know, how many ever years. How do you write dystopia in this world? How do you write sci-fi in this world? Like,
I
how do
mean,
you write
really, the
satire
easiest
in
thing.
this world? You know?
Yeah, satire is the harder part. I think dystopia and sci-fi is easy. You just look at what it is and just be like, okay, what's going to look like in 100 years, right? Like assume nothing changes for the better. And that's what I did with this of like, you know, again, most humans don't even know that Earth is the cradle world, that Earth is where all human life began, because all of that information is paywalled on the internet. The internet's just, you know, the internet that exists in this world, this kind of intercommunication system, is full of falsity. It's completely fabricated. Most of what you read is not true. And the only way to really get to things that are true, you have to have money, right? To get these kind of validated, you know, actual verified things. So like what is true really only exists for certain people, and everyone else is kind of living in these muddled realities of what is popular and what is, you know, politically convenient. Satire is the harder part because, you know, at this point, it's like, I think of RoboCop. People today watch RoboCop and they talk about, see, RoboCop's all about, you know, it's like, we got to clean up the streets, man. And I'm like, you don't know, it's like, you clean up,
No.
like, how do you not understand that RoboCop is satire? Because people just now so earnestly believe the most insane, stupid shit, right? Like, is what it comes down to. The people just earnestly believe things that's like not at all true, right? You know, the fact that there are people who, again, earnestly just to balls to bone believe that something like, say, you know, that George Washington and the founding fathers were not racist people. And it's like, they own, like, a lot of them own slaves, guys, right? Like, they're real clear in their writings. We have their writings. It's real clear why, you know, and, you know, injustice for all didn't mean everybody. And they knew that, right? Like, and that wasn't something like, well, you know, at the time, there was plenty of political authors, most of them non-American, writing about how basically ludicrous it was for the United States to say, you know, all men are created equal, and then be like, yet you have slavery, right? Like, that was not like a hot, you know, that was not, no one ever thought of that. That was a hot take in 1778, right? Like, you know, and it's just, and it's, the thing is, like, people forget that it's okay if history is sad or history is bad, or people that you think are heroes are not perfect, because they're human, and we want heroes, right? That's always what we want to do. We want to have heroes. We want to have these kind of idolized immortal characters in our shared past, because it makes us feel like, yeah, we're going to be okay, right? Of course, the way we live our lives, the way we live in the world is okay because of these heroes. And if it's just people, then people make mistakes, people are fallible, and all of a sudden, yeah, maybe the world you live in isn't as perfect as you want to believe it is. Right? And it's scary to think that, right?
I could ask you a million questions. I'm gonna shorten it a bit. I just have so much to ask you, but I also want you to be able to see your kids and all that.
Yeah, bedtime is looming.
I guess that's important, right?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, I'm just doing what every parent in today's world is doing. I'm hiding from my children in my bedroom right now and hoping that Bluey lasts long enough for them.
Tom Malone again has a good one. He says, he writes, I feel like a lot of sci-fi or related fiction tends to mirror something or be very close to another work in the same genre, but all seem to bring something unique. What do you think yours is, or rather your favorite?
Oh, well, again, what unique that brings to mind? You know, I think mine is, I think it's just a little, I think what's unique about it is just, it's, you know, something I think is true is I try to be very empathetic to everyone in this book, right? There's characters who start off as kind of villains and become a little bit more characters, even characters I don't really like, I try to be empathetic to, you know, and I think that's an important part of just understanding that people are people. People are flawed. I think Gian is flawed. I don't necessarily agree with some of the positions he takes during the course of the book. I think he is very flawed, but so is the other characters that appear in it. And I think that's good. I think that's important. I think it's what empathy allows us to do is to accept that humans are not perfect and we do not need perfection to get along with each other, right? We just need to be able to validate that what the other feels is meaningful, right? And that there, you know, a lot of the times our misdeeds are the result of our pain as opposed to our malice, you know, and I think that helps. But you know, I mean, in terms of this, like when I was writing this, a lot of times something that helped me reread is like, this is book in many ways is very cyberpunk at times. So I'm thinking of like William Gibson, and I'm thinking of Neil Stephenson. And then, I always thinking of Octavia Butler and Samuel Delany. And more recently, N.K. Jemisin and Nindende Ejiofor. And so I'm, thinking about their works and like, kind of taking some of their ideas and playing with it, or just, interpreting it in the way that I understand it. And I think that's good. I mean, I think that's, science fiction, especially as a genre over the last 150 years, has very much built on conversation with other writers. It's this person had this idea, I mean, think of it this way. Even today, how many books are in direct conversation with Mary Shelley and Frankenstein? Right? Of, again, the idea of giving sentience to something that maybe never had sentience or should never have had sentience, right? What is sentience? So I think that's what makes sci-fi really great, honestly. And I think that's one of the reasons I think I like generally sci-fi, at least writing sci-fi more than sometimes fantasy, is I think fantasy lacks that conversation because it's usually just Tolkien is the best, move on. Right, like rather than being in conversation, being like, oh no, well, Gibson's great, but he was kind of wrong here. Philip K. Dick is great, kind of wrong here. Yeah.
Well, I mean, after reading the book, like Gian is as real as we are. When in 2016 or whatever, or 2014, before you started the book, he didn't exist. So, I mean, you build quite a world. You build characters like you talk about for which you have empathy. So cool to have you talk about the conversation. Like you're definitely adding to the conversation the themes of freedom for sure. I mean, education or lack thereof, ignorance. You give a shout out to those, to Jemisin and Butler and all of these, and it's really cool to see the genre moving forward. Or
oh yeah,
like,
I'm
keep going.
I'm very excited to see writers in 15 or 20 years writing sci-fi, because it's just, I mean, already you can see it, but even more so when you've just got a whole generation of people raised on, science fiction and fantasy that's just not the same thing all the time. Right. Like this has different perspective, different voices, different mythologies, different cultural touchstones, right? Like all of that. I mean, again, it's going to be wild. I can't wait to read it.
And yeah, it's so cool. I mean, you started off tonight talking about the community of writers, Jesse, people that your mentors, your mentees, you've been both, all that. So that's just so cool that you're writing important stuff and, passing it down to the next generation. And I'm not saying that because you're old.
No, I'm getting there. Trust me. I feel it.
So here's a lighthearted one for you. Who plays Gian in the movie? Because this book needs to be a movie.
Oh God, I think it would depend on versus young versus old.
Okay. Oh, sure. Right.
Yeah. So because it takes over some time of his life. So younger Gian, as a movie. Damn, that's hard. Actually, I have not thought of that. I don't really ever think that.
You got time. I mean, it probably won't get optioned until 2022, 23.
Yeah, that would be sweet. I could use it. I got to pay off my student loans. Speaking of passing the testing protocols, let's see. I'm trying to think who I would love, actually, because I think he's in that age where he could, some digital magic could do would be like Idris Elba. That would be dope as shit. Or Chiwetel Ejiofor. I think also would be an excellent Gian. I think both. Maybe it's the British sense of the kind of pathos they can bring. But who else? Yeah, I think those would be my two front runners. Mostly because I watch almost anything they're both in.
True. I'm gonna agree with that. I like the British thing. I like the fact that some of the parts you're reading, like the insurance part, right? The insurance takedown. It's so cool how obviously John is intelligent,
right?
But it's like the way that he's just so like matter of fact about things, about what he doesn't know about them.
Yep.
So just stating what they are and shows how like ridiculously like maze like the paperwork process is for insurance. It's just
yeah. I mean, a big part of that was who I can thank for that the most was actually I guess amateur historian podcaster Dan Carlin, because he always talks about that, especially in politics. He approaches things from the Martian perspective, right? Imagine someone who has no concept of what the hell anybody is talking about. If you had to sit down and explain to them this is what this is, would they understand it, and would they not be horrified? right? Of like, wait, why the hell do you do this?
Mhm.
So I was trying to write with that sense of that he is a Martian, right? Like he comes in this world and he has just looking at really our world and having like just not taking anything for granted as true. It'd be like, wait, why do you do this way?
Yes.
You know, why does it look like this?
Man, it's been an honor to be in conversation with you. This is definitely not, goodbye. We'll do it again.
Oh yeah,
in
definitely.
whatever venue, hopefully in person.
Yes, that'd be lovely.
Thanks for sending along a copy. Very generous of you. Thanks for letting me read it.
Thank you.
And great luck in the future. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate it. And I, again, big thanks to MySpace, or maybe MySpace. Well, them too, because, they taught me to code. I know HTML because of them. But, to My Place Cafe in Pasadena, right? Like, thank you, big ups. And I hope to be there live in person one day, do some events with maybe some other great writers, because LA's got a very vibrant scene of many different kinds of writers.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks to Jesse for kind of helping organize this and doing all he can. And then, of course, big thanks to Peter. And again, I mean, if you haven't checked out Chills at Will's podcast, you absolutely should. Again, if you like listening to literary conversations, Peter's quite excellent at asking amazing, very interesting questions to writers that are not just like, hey, so what's in your book, but like, really relevant, get to the heart of the work. And the rarest thing I think interviewers can do, which is understand what they've read and be able to ask questions to the author that help illuminate that to others. So make sure you check out Chills at Will. That's again just fantastic podcast.
I really, really appreciate that. Jesse, I appreciate you giving me some time. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. My pleasure, Pete. Thank you again for doing this segment. Thank you, Daniel, for agreeing to read to us. Well, that concludes the Prose Night at My Place Cafe.
I have to do it because screw the algorithm. To help fight the algorithm, speaking of which, if you want to really help anybody, whether it's an indie author or not, is 5-star reviews on like things like Goodreads, Amazon, all that kind of stuff. All that helps the algorithm, because otherwise you just get buried in the noise. So just saying.
Gotcha.
Not saying, I'm just saying.
Well, thank you all who are watching. Thank you, LaTanya Smith, and the rest of the My Place family. Thank you, Scott and Creeley, for your introduction to your brother. And thank you, Peter, for the In Conversation segment. To get in touch with Daniel, you can follow him on Twitter and now Instagram at DJR The Lost Boy. You can also find him on Facebook. Visit his website, www.dgrthelostboy.com. Tomorrow, from 1 to 3, women in NAACP Pasadena and Girl Scouts 3861, along with Donovan Shane Consulting, will hold a chat amongst middle and high schoolers to discuss personal branding and intersectionality. Go to Win Pasadena's IG to register. Link is in their bio. Also tomorrow from 3 to 5, Spectrum Publishing will be taking over again at My Place Cafe with their Spectrum 28 Create release party. Tune in at 3 p.m. to see me, Christian Kidd, and Luis Villalobos from the Independence Day special, along with other featured authors from this issue. Have a great weekend, everyone, and remember to make My Place your place.